But also, Josh is frozen.
Oh, yes, he is. I was wondering, like, I feel like I set that up for Josh to say something, and then Mike responded, and then I had to pull up Skype so I could look to see he's frozen.
I was doing like the whole Doctor Strange thing, looking for his hair to move a little bit. Because I couldn't tell if he was just being still and, not moving.
I feel like I see one strand of hair of his sticking up straight up. Do you see that?
Yeah, that's what I was looking at, actually. I was like, is that going to fall? It's not moving. He's frozen.
I think I found our cold open. Skype is so fucking great. Anybody gotta take a shit? Now's the time.
Oh, shit, I froze again. Oh, here it comes.
I'm still able to send a message. Oh, no, okay. I was going to say we saw the message come through, so I thought maybe...
I was going to say it's Josh.
Are you guys there?
Yeah.
Yes. Josh, I want you to know the last 4 text messages you sent me. Cool. Fuck. Pause. Fuck.
That's an accurate description of my mood.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Brad Guys Super Friends. I'm your host, Brian Labick. Joining me for this episode is Mike Bradley.
I hate you sometimes for that, but you know what? At the same time, I like the surprise. As you guys know, I have been revealing one category per episode for our 150th Jeopardy Spectacular, and today's reveal is going to be Final Jeopardy. So... be prepared.
You're going to tell us the category of Final Jeopardy in advance?
Yes.
All right.
That's ballsy.
That is ballsy. That's against show protocol. They don't really know the any of the categories, I suppose, but still. All right, go ahead. I'll really know what to buff up on.
Is cult classics.
Ooh. I'll probably suck at that. I'm just going to throw that out there now. Of course, I think I say that after every category you announce, so if I set the bar really low, I can only go up from there.
Yeah, you can be...
Of course, I guess this is assuming I make it to Final Jeopardy.
You can be the
as long as you're in the positives, you can compete in Final Jeopardy.
Sorry, Josh, what'd you say?
I said you could be the Venom of the Jeopardy game.
Oh, yeah, the one that just won't...
the low bar one that somehow ends up surpassing all expectations.
Yeah, and now we've already had a conversation where we're talking to each other, but Josh Zorich is here too.
I am here.
So we have assembled our crew on tap for this one. We're going to dive into the wizarding world of Harry Potter and give our review of Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald. Is it Grindelwald or Grindelwald?
I guess
Do we know the chronology?
If you're saying it with the accent.
Debatable, yeah.
Yeah. English accent or European, like more Eastern European accent.
And it's one of those things...
I count on you guys for this ruling.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things that's like, if you listen to the audio books, because he has mentioned quite a bit at certain parts of the Harry Potter novels, if you listen to the audiobooks, the performer will say it one way. If his name gets dropped very, very briefly in one of the movies, it might be said a different way. And then if a producer or someone mentions it, or a character, they might say it one of those two ways. Like there has not been great consistency.
Okay, so you could say it however
Tomato,
you feel
tomato.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. I'll probably switch it up 3 different times by the time we've done with this podcast. So yeah, this entire episode will be what we like to call a magic minute. So, Akio intro.
Hello, wizards, squibs, and muggles alike. It's time for a magic minute, where we talk about Harry Potter for as long as we need to. If you're thinking, hey, that's not a minute then, well, you can stick it up your whomping willow.
All right, so we're going to be talking Fantastic Beasts. We decided to do this last minute. I have not actually... everyone knows, if you've listened to the show enough, you know me and my outline, so I have not had the time to prepare an outline. So, Josh has volunteered to spearhead this discussion, especially since these guys are more the experts for this kind of thing, so I'm just here to give the quote-unquote normal person's opinion of this movie. I kind of realize this must be what it feels like for Josh when Mike and I are here talking about Star Wars, so Josh, it's all you, man. Steer the ship.
Spectacular. Well, I guess let's start by telling everyone that the three of us, at least, did indeed see the movie upon its weekend release.
Mm-hmm. And together, which I think is probably one of the few times we've actually all been together to see a movie.
Yeah.
I think the last time was Pacific Rim. Uprising.
Yeah.
The last one.
Oh my god, yeah.
And then, specifically then a movie that we, the people on the episode that ended up talking about it were actually all there together, yeah. So, yeah, we went to the movies, and now you're going to listen to us talk about it.
Our goal for next year should be to get Andy involved with some of these screenings when we can all get together and see a movie.
Oh, definitely.
I agree. Andy,
we can force
if you
him
listen,
to get out opening weekend. He's not going to listen. We'll have to tell him later.
So as Brian likes to do, the track record is to try to give general impressions and just overall feelings first, and that's really hard for me to do because I just like to dive in and talk about things before we hit spoilers. But we will try to do that first. So I would say my initial impressions were that I definitely was engaged with this movie much more than the first of the Fantastic Beasts series. It felt a bit more dynamic, and I was just, like I said, I was more interested in the story that was being presented this time around.
Okay.
It definitely had the benefit of being able to go a little bit deeper into new mythologies, new unanswered questions, new side stories or plots or information that may not, it was able to put a bit more charm in while still having a very interesting story to follow. I rewatched the first Fantastic Beasts the Monday before this movie released, and I found that I actually liked it a bit better after having been away from it for a little bit. But now that I compare it against something, I feel that the first movie really felt very self-contained. Like, if you didn't take... If you took out the little bitty part that Grindelwald actually plays, or the idea of Grindelwald even plays in that movie, it could have been a one-off standalone story about these characters and these people, and that would have been it. It didn't really feel to me like it left a lot of unanswered path and where are we going next. Whereas this one definitely felt much more like a classic structure that J.K. Rowling can put in front of you. I like that. When I left the first Fantastic Beasts movie, and even for a while, even if you still watch it, I don't feel like you're left with burning questions. You could have discussion, you could talk about things, but what I loved and what I realize now that I miss from that first one is that feeling of, you've given me more story, but you've also left me with a real desire to want to know more about what you haven't told me yet. And I feel like that definitely picked that up in this. And I think you guys, would you guys agree that it felt like a bit, I don't say more intense per se, but more action-y. Especially from the opening. It had a much stronger opening.
Yeah.
It set a good tone right there.
I mean, I wanted to, and I didn't get around to it, but I've only seen the first Fantastic Beast once. I saw it in the theater. So that was, how many years ago? 2, 3? 2. When did that come out? Okay, yeah. So it was not fresh in my mind seeing this one, and I feel like I probably would have benefited from watching that again.
Most likely.
And I'm trying to think how I can talk about this movie generally too, because I want to get into specifics like Josh, but for me, I think I'm coming at it, and I thought about this afterwards. I think the way we've done the couple episodes of the Never Seen That with Steph and Lord of the Rings, I kind of feel like she does with Lord of the Rings with this movie.
Okay.
Is that, like, you are very aware that this is part 2 of 5, that there are more stories coming after, and it just feels like it's trying to get from point A to point B, but there's no really resolution here.
Okay.
And maybe if I knew a lot more of the lore, like, I feel like a lot more would make sense to me than what happened in this movie, but I feel like they name drop people, and then I'm like, okay, who's that? How do they fit into this story?
Okay.
And this movie does not take the time to explain that, so if you're not as caught up to this stuff, it kind of just blows over, they move on, and you're left going, why was that important?
Okay. Well,
Fair.
Let me try to respond to that in a way, and Mike, you tell me if you think I'm off base. So I think some of the stuff you're talking about is more fun fan service that does exist.
And there's one specific fan service thing in there that I want to get into specifically, because I think it was wasted beyond belief.
Okay.
To me.
Sure. Then there's a lot of new stuff, to be honest, that might seem like it's rooted in, like the richer part of the text of the books, but that wasn't really emphasized strongly or left out of the movies entirely.
Right.
But in fact, it is completely brand new stuff. Like, even to hardcore fans, like, it is the new stuff. So I think there's a blend.
If you guys feel as lost
two.
as I do with some of this stuff, then I might come out of this feeling a little bit better. But
Sure.
Yeah, right now I think I'm very middle of the road with this movie.
Okay. Mike, how did it leave you?
I guess I'm gonna be the unpopular opinion here. My overarching feeling after watching this movie was meh.
Okay.
I feel like, without getting into specifics, that some things were done poorly.
Okay.
You have chosen
Poorly, yeah.
I'm trying to word it without, specifics. So I would say some things I feel were done poorly. Some things I felt were done without enough consideration as to what impact they may have on the lore that already exists.
Okay.
It may, I'm sure, since JK has her hand in writing these, of course, that there is lore consideration there, but I feel like there's some that's a little bit outlandish and done in spite of the fact that it's done for shock factor as opposed to loyalty to what we already have learned to be true. Then there's also things that, again, I feel like were... Again, it's going to be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like this movie has a Jar Jar Binks in it.
Really?
And I'm
definitely curious.
Don't know how I feel about that.
To see... I kind of get I think I know what you're talking about, but I'll be curious to get deeper into it later. So I have a couple ideas on that, and it may be indicative of the movie's initial performance, actually. So my first impression is that this series suffers at its core from the fact that the main background piece that's running through all of these, which is the Dumbledore-Grindelwald conflict, was all but left out of the cinematic versions of the Harry Potter movies. It was in fact a very important subplot of history that explains a lot of core characters' decisions in Harry's series of events they're not taking place in real time, but they are important to explaining motivations and overall decision making of certain things. And it was really put on the back burner in a really disappointing way. So I think the series suffers from constantly having to dig itself out through exposition or sometimes not even offering some of those explanations and just running with it because they don't have time to give you every little piece of backstory that it wants to. So I think it's starting at a deficit. And I think the other thing it may be suffering from is the fact that unlike, the 8 movies we got of the Harry Potter series based on 7 books, it was based on 7 books. Yeah. Everyone had the opportunity to ingest the source material beforehand. And that was very much some of the propulsion of getting people to the theater. The fact that the books were, released well in advance, several years in advance of its corresponding movie. There were just years and years of background and rich detail and discussion to be had. There's no source material in advance for this stuff.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I think... So one of the things that I've said multiple times that I think the Harry Potter the Harry Potter films suffered from is a rather poor adaptation from page to screen. Now, in this case, J.K. Rowling is still the principal and sole screenwriter, so she has to write, and there might be some editing that occurs just as in any film, and some little things get shaved away, but she has to write straight for the screen. She has to write with the intent that she's giving it its slimmest, most focused storytelling possible. But maybe when you have to do that, the opportunity to take your time a bit more and explain your intentions behind this, more elaborate fabric of characters and interrelated connections and events can't come through on screen. And so maybe that leaves it a bit lacking.
Yeah, I would argue that I think, well, it's weird because I think this one and the first Fantastic Beasts, to me, the pacing felt a bit slow. Mm-hmm. Just moving to the one from one thing to the next, it kind of slows down in between things. Okay. But at the same time, I kind of want like an extended cut of both of those films because I feel like they're, like you said, I think there's stuff left out that is important that would be nice to hear or be shown. And there's a couple instances, not that there's a lot of stuff that was cut, but I feel like there were certain things in this movie where it was like, I don't know, some of the transitions were weird to me. Like they cut like a 2 minute section out somewhere for some reason of just showing characters move from one place to another. Suddenly they're in somewhere, and then the next shot they're out in the street in the open when they were somewhere else completely different before that. Like there's no, you almost need that transition just to fill the gaps of someone leaving one place and going to another. And it's weird to me, but it jumped out as being odd.
Gotcha. Or even
but like
just
stupid shit
enough
like that, I feel like
time
could fill in better.
Between where you're at before and where they're at now. So like, even if they're somewhere and then they're somewhere in the next scene, if there's 4 other scenes that take place in between there, you don't care. When it's
right, exactly,
boom, boom, it's kind of like, whoa.
It's a lot more jarring that way when they're on top of each other like that. Yeah.
And as far as like the page to the screen thing, yeah, I feel like that's always going to be something that is difficult to convey, no matter what book you're trying to translate to the screen.
Yeah,
it's not easy to do that because words say so much more than pictures. In totality, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I'll tell you, to be able to describe what you've seen is much more valuable than, seeing it, I think. But as far as it applies here, I think one of the biggest shortcomings of this movie itself was that it is part 2 of 5. that
Okay.
it is ending in a spot where I feel like it's ending at a spot that would have been better served halfway into this movie, and providing a different climax in some way.
I think that was sort of what I was getting at, like the way Steph feels when watching Lord of the Rings. Like, this movie definitely just feels like a stepping stone to something else.
Yeah,
Like it's more. The movie just feels like all 2.5 hours of setup.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
and exactly. Like, I feel like when we get into spoilers, I will discuss further, but I feel like, 2.5 hours to set up one big spoilery moment. And
Yeah, I would argue one big spoilery moment and another minor spoilery moment, which will also be a anchor and a cornerstone of at least the next movie as a major obstacle to overcome.
So I know we're starting to like beat around the bush and just say
Yeah.
spoilery things. Do we want to get into
Well,
it now?
before we do that, and because I think contextually it's just going to be easier to discuss it for what we need to do.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I do want to put out some numbers. And maybe this is reflective of maybe a number of factors regarding Harry Potter fans anymore. But out of the 10, we'll call them 10 Harry Potter movies, the 8 Harry Potter movies proper, and then now 2 Fantastic Beasts films, which of the 10 do you think had the highest opening weekend?
I mean, Deathly Hallows
Ooh.
Part 2.
That was going to be my guess, and I feel like that might be too obvious, so maybe I'll pick something else. Half-Blood Prince.
Half-Blood Prince is number 7.
Oh, that was
believe it or
way
not.
low.
And it was Deathly Hallows Part 2. And in fact, for a short time, that held, I think it was until Avengers, for almost a year, for about 10 months, Deathly Hallows Part 2 held the U.S. record for opening weekend at $169.2 million. In retrospect, The Crimes of Grindelwald, out of all 10, comes in at the lowest.
I think I read that headline today.
It was a little over 62 million in opening weekend. Number 9, the next lowest, was the first Fantastic Beasts. So all 8 Harry Potter movies in opening weekend have performed better than these 2 movies. And I think part of that could be disenchantment, but I was thinking about this today. Going back to the fact that there's source material for the Harry Potter books, the first Harry Potter book was released, I think, at least 3, if not 4 years before the first film was released.
Yeah.
The last film was released in 2011, Deathly Hallows Part 2. The book for that was released 4 years prior, but you had already had basically a decade of all these movies building up. Like, Deathly Hallows Part 2 was effectively like the Infinity War of that, right? It's the culmination in a lot of ways. It was the thing. You not only had years of love and discussion and activity books and reading it in school and hearing about religious groups hating it and everything. You had all of this stuff. And on top of that, what you had was little kids wanting to go to the movies because of that book they read. And you take a little kid, their parent is coming with them.
Mm-hmm.
Even if 2 or 3 kids go and only one parent goes, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of reasons just beyond people don't like these or don't like them anymore that could play into those other box office numbers. There's not, other than people who are our age now, who were the old children and teenagers reading those Harry Potter books when they came out. There's not, like, other than a 10-year-old reading Harry Potter now, there is not a Fantastic Beasts, Crimes of Grindelwald book that you can give to a 10-year-old, a year before the movie comes out to get them excited about this world of that movie so that when it does come out, they, insist that their parent takes them to the movie.
Yeah, I think that's
game.
sort of, like what you covered before. There's no source material for these movies. Fantastic Beasts don't have a book that came out before that.
No.
I mean, there's the encyclopedia or the book that Newt writes in the movie is a bit of source material, right? For the Harry Potter franchise?
Only in the
or at least it's referenced in some way.
Senses.
Okay, but it's there if you wanted to really dive into the lore and you could find some of that stuff, right?
Not really having anything to do with the narrative of this story.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
I think that's part of why
stretch, yeah.
The only connective tissue is if people know this is part of the Harry Potter franchise, then they would go see it. But I don't know, even the promotions, there's nothing in the title that tells you this is the Harry Potter universe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Wizarding World thing that they try and put on stuff doesn't tell your average idiot that's a part of it.
So having the books released 4 years prior to a movie, that generates that much more excitement for when the movie comes out. You have 4 years to absorb and read this book.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic Beasts doesn't have that build-up other than, again, that Harry Potter connective tissue. And, the Star Wars spin-offs, they make sense for people, because they slap that Star Wars logo over everything, so that's connected to that universe.
Yeah, I feel like something as simple in the marketing as that could make a big difference. Slap the little HP with the, lightning bolt on it. Instead of being the Wizarding World, make it the Potter World. It doesn't matter what you title this.
Mm-hmm.
You're just marketing it to make more money. And I think if they do it properly, like Brian's saying, let people know it's Harry Potter, it'll do better. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you guys this, too, because they've already agreed to make 5 movies.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that plan changes if these continue to get lower and lower at the box office?
I think they'd have to... I don't, because they'd have to get so low that it would almost have to become a money loser for them to stop. I just looked at the worldwide numbers for these 10 movies. So globally, the first Fantastic Beasts did make more than The Prisoner of Azkaban globally.
So it made $800 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So they're probably not even worried about domestic totals anymore. They're just looking at strictly overseas stuff.
They're making plenty of money.
Yeah. So this new movie has a budget estimated of about $200 million. Domestically, the first movie made $243 million, and internationally made $815. So it's still a sizable enough return. In context, only one of the Harry Potter movies breached $1 billion, and it was Deathly Hallows Part 2. All of the other ones are in the 800 to 900 million range, so they do really strong every time.
Yeah, I was thinking the Fantastic Beasts totals. I didn't look prior to this, but I was figuring for as low as they were domestic, if they even getting good international take, if they would have ended somewhere around 500 million. And I wasn't sure if that number would be enough for a studio to justify making 3 more.
Yeah.
If the numbers keep going down each movie they make.
Right. And I to some degree we'll have to see how this performs, the new one performs globally in the end. That could potentially affect, say, the budget that they approve for, movies 4 and 5. But in terms of not canceling this, there's no effing way.
Well, I figured, I'm thinking now would be the time to restructure something. If you get halfway through, if you get 3 movies out there and they'd be like, okay, we have to make those last 2 movies into 1 movie. I don't think that's possible. But now, with 3 movies left, if you say, you know what, we don't want to do 5, can we make it 4?
And maybe make 3 and 4 a little bit longer.
Right. You can jam-pack those 2, maybe pick up the pace a little bit and make them tighter for it.
Yeah.
And then you just cut your losses after 4 and just forget about 5 and might come out okay in the end.
Yeah.
But, I don't know.
And
if they're making $800 million globally, I don't see that happening.
Right.
Yeah, with those totals, I think they're just going to keep going. I think that's fine.
Yeah. It's funny. There is a pacing issue, and I think it goes to somewhat of her style of writing, and especially her style of writing when it comes to these stories. I mean, she's written almost like a dozen other novels under other pen names and her own name as well that have nothing to do with this stuff. They're just like regular adult novels. But with this stuff, if she's approaching writing the story for the screen somewhat in the same way that she did for the book, if she didn't adapt herself enough, almost in like a Tolkien way to know, well, sometimes I can't just spend this entire scene on expressing detail and giving you this idea. Like, I need to progress the story and keep it entertaining and keep you guessing and do such and such. I now with 2 under her belt for this series, I can see more of her novel style coming through in how she wrote the screenplays.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's just some context. But yeah, you want to dive in and let's spoil everything we can.
Spoiler time.
Definitely.
We got to throw out the spoiler warning. Yeah, we're gonna cue Andy. So if you haven't seen the movie, we're gonna stop you now before we go any further because we're gonna get into spoilers. So if you don't want to hear any specifics for the movie, you can pause this now, come back after you've seen it, and again, spoilers to follow.
Wee-oo, spoiler! Wee-oo, spoiler! Something like that.
All right, so we are in spoiler territory. Yeah, I don't know. I know we keep skirting around a bunch of the issues from before. Is there anything specific that you guys are itching to talk about?
I mean, I think there's like the obvious 3 or 4 pieces that we could immediately bring up. Was there anything about your general feelings that you conveyed before we hit those? I think we could deep dive onto some of those other ones.
Okay.
Was there anything about your general feeling about the movie that you could better express by being able to talk more specifically now?
Now I'm trying to remember what the hell I talked about generally. I think I mentioned there was a character that I felt like was there for fan service that was completely wasted.
All right, let's start there.
And that's Nagini.
Nagini. Okay.
I think she's there just for the reveal that, yes, it's a person that's not the snake. She has 5 lines of dialogue and does nothing but follow Credence around the entire movie and then ends up just by herself. There's nothing significant that happens there, I think, other than had you seen or read the other Harry Potter stuff, you know that she is tied to Voldemort, and that's a big deal.
Sure.
But in this movie, there's no fucking point for her in this movie.
See, I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Okay.
And, you heard my opinions about everything else. Nagini being revealed, one, she's still alive. She's still there. She's still a part of this universe to do more in future films. So
again, more setup.
Right, setup.
If she's just there for setup, bring her in when she can be significant.
Well, I mean, if she's going to be part of Credence's love interest, I think, bringing her in before the split. And,
I mean, is that a thing that's supposed to happen, or is that just prediction?
I mean, that was...
Because I didn't even get that they were, into each other.
That's part of that thing that's all brand new material.
Yeah, that's not something we know anything about.
The idea of knowing Nagini as a backstory whatsoever, I think as far as Potter fans were concerned, Nagini was just a snake that Voldemort had encountered and befriended at some point in his past and developed this really close relationship to.
Talk to snakes.
Right.
He never had to be a person.
Everything dealing with her. Now, I will say, and that maybe this is, again, part of how... When there's any book series that is especially written in the way that she wrote the Potter books, there's a lot that just seems like detail. And I wouldn't say necessarily extraneous detail, just detail. It's just part of the story that you may not realize pays off for 3 more books. It doesn't necessarily play an integral role yet. But maybe that is, again, part of the big difference here, where when you're going straight for a cinematic storytelling method, that's how it comes across, is the way that you're describing it, Brian. To someone like you, that is all it came across. I guarantee she'll play a bigger, more important role as the story progresses, because there's a lot more to get from where we now know her quasi-origin story is. We know where she ends up. There's a big gap still to fill in with her life to where she's going to eventually end up. But right, I can get it like from just a viewer like yourself going into it. I could see why that impression would come across.
See, to like seeing her on screen do, in my mind, nothing. One, I became very conscious. Okay, this is number 2 of 5,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2, I just kept thinking this is wasted screen time for the pacing that slows this movie down and gaps that are in there. If you cut a lot of her out of the movie, or even don't put her in there at all, that's time that could be devoted somewhere else that improves this movie, not 2 movies later.
And I would argue that her inclusion, even if this was all it was ever going to be and she died at the end of the movie, I would be fine with, simply because of the layers of evil that it adds to Voldemort. Because here's this person who genuinely is a good person that just happens to be able to turn into a snake because of this curse that they're afflicted with, that eventually they're going to become completely a snake, that was a good person that becomes so corrupted when Voldemort traps part of his soul within her that they turn evil.
See, I'm glad that you brought it up that way, because from my perspective, I was happy to see her introduced in the way that she was, just because she didn't start out as a Grindelwald follower. She didn't start out as a Death Eater. She didn't start out as a bad person. And she becomes a companion of Voldemort long before she's ever made a Horcrux. At least a few years. And knowing, like, now I'm actually more curious, like, how do we get not only from her as a person to a permanent snake? Like, what is the event? The writing on the wall was obvious that there will be something, through exposition, there will be something that occurs that is her final transformation. She can never go back, just like they laid out for you. But no, okay, so she's not a horrible character. She's not a bad person. You don't root against her. But in the end, she ends up on the dark side. So how do we get to there? What is
it's corruption.
The thing?
Can I, if I just step in, because I'm the timeline of Harry Potter, you guys probably know better than me. Now, I understand this is a prequel to the Harry Potter stuff. Are we going to see Voldemort at all in the Fantastic Beasts?
Well,
so
let me
that's not
let
guaranteed.
me say, yeah, right. That's why I immediately corrected myself. Probably not. But if they wanted to, what would be like really smart is if in like the 5th movie. So basically, right now, like Voldemort, the character Tom Riddle, who becomes Voldemort, the human Tom Riddle, he is, at the time that Fantastic Beasts and the Crimes of Grindelwald take place, he is probably like 3 to 4 years old.
Okay.
I thought he wouldn't have been
depending on
born
what
yet.
time stretches for the next couple movies, he could be involved somewhere.
Probably not involved, because he doesn't have a reason to be involved, but he could be seen.
Doesn't mean the Marvolos or the Gaunts won't show up.
Very true, and that would be very fun.
Well, I'm just thinking the stuff that Mike was referencing of like her falling under the corruption of Voldemort. I'm thinking we're not going to see Voldemort in this series, so that wouldn't happen on screen.
Right. So
the build-up that you are referring to won't happen, which leads me back to why is she here?
Maybe it's Grindelwald that corrupts her.
It very well
turns her bad.
Okay.
And if that's, I will eat my words. If that's like, then she has a purpose.
Yeah, and I would say J.K. Rowling is pretty good at two main things: at giving you rich detail and painting a vivid word picture, and also in her writing, at least for the books, very good at not really wasting her time on things that she doesn't feel that you shouldn't care about. Okay. Most things seem to, I feel, play a purpose.
Yeah, she doesn't throw in, here's Nagini, and we're not going to tell you any more of this story or anything about that, even though it's, this really interesting thing that we added here.
Right.
We're not going to pay it off. You're going to get the payoff at some point.
It's hard to tell, because because this part of the narrative is new to you guys, so you're not really sure
Much of it,
exactly
yes.
where it's going to end up, so you can't fill in those gaps for me.
Right.
No.
Now,
But-
I think if we even went back and listened to probably 2 years ago when we did our discussion after seeing the first one, especially if that was the only time you saw it,
Yeah.
it's a little background refresher maybe for everybody. So these 5 series of movies are going to span basically from like 1926, 1927 to 1945.
Okay.
JK has all but said that the 5th movie will be the culminating big mega historical battle that all the wizard world knows happened between Dumbledore and Grindelwald. Just like in the Harry Potter series where you got like a mid-card fight between Dumbledore and Voldemort in Order of the Phoenix, you might have some preliminary interaction that occurs between the two of them, between Dumbledore and Grindelwald in movies 3 and 4, but basically the ultimate climax is going to be in movie 5, that is the fight where, spoilers, Dumbledore defeats Grindelwald.
Right.
Here's how I tie my history. In J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter timeline, the Chamber of Secrets, the second book in the series, takes place in the year 1992.
Mm-hmm.
In that, they constantly reference the fact that the Chamber of Secrets had been opened 50 years earlier. And then we eventually learn that it was opened by Tom Riddle when he was a student at school, because he is a direct descendant of Salazar Slytherin. So that was presumably 1942. 50 years before.
52.
That is, no, 92 minus 50.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my bad.
So Tom Riddle is 16 or 17 years old in 1942. So he is a teenager in school during the escalation of Grindelwald's reign. He is out of school by the time he's defeated, but it is very conceivable that, say, in movie 4, if they wanted to show us a teenage Voldemort who has learned about his family's history and he's kind of already committed himself to going down this dark path, etc., and he has this example happening in the real world, they could very much tie him in for like 10 minutes if they wanted to. But that's where I say I don't think he personally is not going to play an active role in the series of events. But I like where Mike's head is in bringing in parts of his wizarding family that he descends from. Maybe not so much his Muggle family. I mean, maybe. But I think his descendants from his wizard side could definitely pop in for some reason, and that would make sense. Mm-hmm. Because you're seeing all these people in the past starting to subscribe to, the quote-unquote Dark Lord of that generation.
Right.
And perhaps it's the inspiration he draws is that Grindelwald's too weak and was weak enough to be beaten by Dumbledore, and so that's his inspiration.
Right. And Tom Riddle will have Dumbledore as a teacher during his years in Hogwarts, so he has that personal exposure to him for years.
Mm-hmm.
To fill in the rest of the gap as it concerns Nagini, since that's kind of where your mind started, Brian.
Yeah.
So Harry Potter is born in like 1980. His first birthday is when when Voldemort tries to kill him as a baby, and he is vanquished for a decade. So Voldemort for 10 years is living in the quote, like, as a spirit force, keeping him alive, traveling throughout the world. At some point in the later books, they mentioned that Voldemort met Nagini while he was in exile as a spirit, presumably in Albania, which for whatever reason she chose the forests of Albania as his consummate place where he just was for 10 years as a ghost, effectively, like a spirit piece. And when Nagini first shows up in the books, it is at the beginning of the 4th book, Goblet of Fire. So she is already his like side-by-side companion at that point. Voldemort, as he just starts to regain a physical body, commits a murder at the beginning of that book, and he uses that murder to create a new Horcrux, because he thinks at that point he's still one shy of his 7 goal, because he never knew about Harry. So he has Nagini with her, so he makes Nagini a Horcrux by putting this last piece of his fractured soul from this murder into her, effectively making her like tied to him until the end.
Right.
But we kind of have this gap. Let's say Nagini carries through the rest of our Fantastic Beasts narrative. She's around till 1945. Somewhere between 1945 and the early 80s to mid 80s, we won't know what happens to her unless that's told to us. So I'm presuming as she gets utilized as a character through these stories, we will, as you guys have been, postulating, we will see how does she end up, and does that in and of itself explain why she may be lured to someone like Voldemort so many years later?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure this is going to pay off at some point. And if it's the next movie, that might be okay for me. But if it's not until like movie 5, like why introduce her now is my biggest question.
Yeah,
if they're just going to string her along for 3 other movies until we finally get the reveal or payoff later.
I think they needed that connection to Credence. In some way, shape, or form. They needed her for whatever story she's going to tell.
Mm-hmm.
She needed to have that connection to Credence. And since Credence was going to be off with Grindelwald and Nagini was not, they needed to form that connection now.
Rather than, because it might be too difficult. If she wants it to be important as it progresses, it would be not now that he is where he is when the movie ends. It would be too difficult to establish that once he's in that position,
right? Because if they bring her in later as a follower of Grindelwald, she is immediately assumed as a bad side character, a negative character.
Right. True.
Whereas they bring her in now, she can be seen in a positive light.
Yeah, and I said to several people after seeing it that I fully expected. Because they all but like slap you in the face with the fact that obviously she's human, she turns into a snake at some point and never gets out. She had to give that direct forward exposition from the circus master that eventually she won't be able to turn back into a human. Right. I was expecting her to make a sacrifice play for Credence in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was going to come in this movie too.
And that would be the instance in which she transforms in order to protect him in some way, and she felt, I could be more of use as a snake for the next 5 minutes, and that is the thing. So I would still bet money that at some point that's how it happens.
Okay.
But Brian, I would say this. So let's if we remember this discussion, if she doesn't really seem to matter or play any kind of role whatsoever until movie 5, like if she's just out of the next 2 movies and just shows up in 5, then yes, you absolutely have a wonderful point.
I'll move us forward to my Jar Jar Binks.
I want to hear this
suggestion.
Don't you say Jacob?
Oh no, not Jacob. The giant cat dragon, to me was little more than a Jar Jar Binks character for people that maybe weren't as interested in the story or not having as good a time with it or something like that to still go, oh, look at that thing. And I feel like its interaction with like the cat toy being how they control it and everything, it was just over the top.
Okay.
Whereas like the Niffler's cute because the Niffler is a little thieving prick that, but has it looks cute, but it's not actually that innocent. It's a little bastard that's like, give me it all, and that's what works for the Niffler in what is essentially an adult movie. This isn't, a Disney movie. This is an adult movie. And the big giant cat thing, I feel like, I don't know. I wasn't into it. And that said as well, the other cats, felt poorly done.
I agree.
They didn't look good. They didn't feel right.
You talking about the ones in the archive?
Yes. I feel like it was a cool idea that we got like no payoff on when, she throws a curse at it and it splits into 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it was. Yeah. And then we get no payoff any further on that. It only happens once, it gets attacked once, it splits once, and then there's just a bunch of cats running around and then they're gone.
That's true. Well, I mean, on the one hand, you think like just like when like they're in the Lestrange vault in Deathly Hallows Part 2, and they touch anything inside the vault and it continues to multiply.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you could almost think like, well, couldn't some sequence like that have taken place where the enemy just keeps growing? On the other hand, it would have been perhaps silly if these are adults, not teenagers, and they're like not learning from their mistake.
Oh no! I agree with that, but they don't multiply when they're attacked by the giant Jar Jar cat.
Maybe it's only magic
the trick
attacks.
was, I thought the trick was magic attacks. The big cat's just putting them in his mouth and throwing them around or pawing them away. He's not using magic against them.
And maybe that is
Newt
a stretch
does say
to try
so
to.
long as you don't attack them. Like that's what his words are. Attack.
Yeah, touche.
But all the same,
mm-hmm.
I felt like in this movie, the creatures that were there, other than the Niffler, didn't serve a purpose. So we have this awesome introduction to the Kelpie. Why the hell did we have a Kelpie in this movie?
Yeah, I will say all that beginning stuff I was disappointed with.
The cool looking bird behind Jacob from the trailer that everybody's like, oh, what's that bird gonna do?
Yeah.
It's gonna stand there and make a funny face once.
I think that's just to remind you that Newt is here for beasts and not really any, like that is his main focus.
Right, but in that to me is like that's great. But we had this whole
It would have been like the Firebird
drive.
Yeah, it would have been like the Firebird at the end of the first Fantastic Beasts, not taking the extract from the other bug thing up into the atmosphere and causing it to rain, which then wipes everybody's memory.
Well, and even
it would have been like not
he
utilizing
was
it. Like,
there because of that. I mean, that's why he came to the U.S. was to free this bird.
Right, among other things.
And yeah, like now they're using Newt, this character they put together, is like, we're going to push him into the greater scheme of things, push him towards being an Auror and all this. And it's like, well then, yeah, he's still going to care about his beast, but now they're going to be a side plot to everything. As opposed to...
Yeah, I guess every movie they can't have him globe-trotting just to hunt down beasts.
No, and I agree with that. I just feel like you didn't need to introduce a bunch of new beasts for no reason that didn't serve the plot.
Fair point.
Like we said, the Kelpie, he rides it for a minute, and then he's
and it
out.
looked so cool once it was out of the water.
Right. It
looked
looks amazing.
Yeah.
Cool looking fucking thing, but serves no purpose at all.
You're not wrong.
And that's a big issue, like you said, with saving time and being able to tell more of the plot. Take out that, 3-4 minutes with the Kelpie?
Yeah.
And put it in with something more significant.
So, speaking of the Kelpie scene and all that, am I the only one that feels really bad for Bunty, his assistant?
Yeah.
I felt bad for Bunty on multiple things, because she's definitely into Newt.
Oh, of course.
And that's like, oh.
To me...
The take your shirt off line was a little on the nose.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, but it reminded me very much... Do either of you watch the BBC Sherlock show with Cumberbatch and
I have.
Martin?
Yeah.
That relationship reminded me 100% like it was modeled after Cumberbatch and the woman who works for the...
In the morgue.
The morgue and the
Wasn't it
forensic
Molly
lab.
or something?
Yeah.
Molly. Yeah,
Molly,
that's her name.
Like 100% like it was a copy of that dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of had the same reaction as maybe, Brian, you had to Nagini, where I thought, like, did we need to see that he has, like an assistant who's apparently, I'm assuming, single and into him, and they're both awkward, and they don't, where that sort of felt like one of the few parts of like extraneous detail. But then I also tried to remember, if this was written in the same, if it was her same approach to storytelling, there is a ton of stuff, I think, in the Harry Potter books that would sort of mimic that.
Yeah.
where you do have these small ancillary characters just providing some additional insight or involvement
Richness.
of someone's life. Yeah, like world building richness, you know?
I mean, I get she doesn't really, and I expected her to sort of pop back
So
up
did I.
somewhere in the movie.
So did I at some point.
Like if you introduce her that early, that somewhere she would show up or pay off somewhere later. But that doesn't irritate me as much because she was there for logical sense. If Newt is off doing things, he can't tend to all the beasts in his case at all times. So
Right.
he has to have someone there to help him.
It did bug me when he told her to go home, even though she's locked in his case.
Oh yeah, did she ever get out?
I don't know if she ever leaves. She doesn't seem to want to.
Oh no.
She seems like being carried around in his case all day. I just find it weird that he's like, you're going to be carried around in my briefcase, and I'm going to take you everywhere you go with me. But then when I want you to, you have to go home.
Oh wait, let's pause there. I took that environment to be an enchanted extension of his apartment, not necessarily the case.
Okay. Yeah, you're right about that.
Right. Yeah,
I
you're
was
correct.
mixing things up. Yeah,
Okay,
that's his
okay.
apartment.
Well, maybe I had misunderstood too, but that's how I.
No, I just
took it.
misremembered. That was
No, because you're right. Because that's when Jacob's over and he goes downstairs and all that stuff's down there.
Yeah.
So it's not in the case.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in the apartment.
Yeah.
Okay, either way, it's still an interesting dynamic that I don't know if they'll ever touch on again.
Maybe not, right? And that's one of the many things we'll have to wait and see on. Speaking of Jacob, Brian, you seem to have been the most enamored with him out of anyone that I know. How did you feel about his role in this? Do you?
It was not as fun. Yeah, the first movie was a lot more fun with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like being completely awestruck by all the stuff that's going on, learning about the magical world and being caught up in it. That's a fun role for him. This one, he still had some standout moments, I think, to me. But him and Queenie and all that stuff, I don't know. It was like, I feel like they really quickly retconned what happened at the end of the first one with nothing more than just a line of dialogue. Like, oh, it didn't work.
They retconned that a little bit on their own at the end of the first one, though, too.
But it still left
Like
it open to massive interpretation.
Right. You could have just explained it away as, oh, he thinks he recognizes, but not that he knows everything.
I'm really glad
And that's-
that you characterized it that way, because there was 2 or 3 points about this that actually did bug me, that being one of them, that really did seem to rely on like 1 or 2 lines of dialogue to explain something that really, really doesn't quite line up.
And that would have been something I would have liked to have seen explained or explored in the movie, of him starting to recognize things or people
Mm-hmm.
and have them try to explain to him, no, you were a part of all this shit that happened the last time, and just sort of slowly bring him back into it to a point of recognition. It wouldn't have to be the whole movie, but like the first act of the movie.
Yeah.
Is to get him up to speed.
3 or 4 minutes of Kelpie out, 3 or 4 minutes of that in.
Yeah. It just seems like every interesting thing that happened with him and Queenie to get him back up to speed happened off screen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's stuff I wanted in the movie.
And it would also add more weight to their relationship.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you would feel more for both of them than you do.
Everything in their relationship is explained in that exposition point of the movie in Newt's apartment.
Yeah.
They're talking to each other, they're explaining where they are in the relationship, what he wants, what she wants, and then she leaves. And then the whole movie is him just chasing after her, which I get, but it wasn't exciting for me, for them.
Right.
Yeah.
To me, the first movie between Jacob and Queenie was a great build-up of a relationship. You know, it made you want him to get the girl, made you want him at the end of the first movie to remember so that he could get the girl. In this movie, I didn't have that same affection toward either of them.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like that is lacking in a big way since they try and make a big moment out of Queenie going with
Making her
Grindelwald at
decision,
the end of
yeah.
the movie.
And are we led to believe that she's just that naive, that she doesn't see the underlying problem of
Well,
his message?
That brings up another problem I had with Queenie's entire story in this whole movie.
I thought she was smarter than that.
She's a legilimens. And they fucked up one part about that pissed me off beyond rationality at one point where Queenie is on the sidewalk kind of holding her head, hearing all these voices. She is not Charles Xavier. As far as I ever understood, a Legilimens had to intentionally hear the voices they hear. They never just heard them unless they were projected into their head by somebody else.
A devil's advocate point I will bring up about that, because I actually kind of liked that charm that they added to it. It felt to me like there are people... The first movie especially, they didn't really... In the Harry Potter series, I feel she made it feel more like legilimency is a learned skill. It is not as much of an inherent quality. And I feel like in the first Fantastic Beasts, Queenie's ease at it almost made it sound like, well, while that can happen, there may be, certain witches or wizards that are born with this really, really, really enhanced antenna, and for them it's not necessarily a spell that they're actively engaging, it's just part of them. And if that's the case, then she would kind of sometimes feel like Xavier or other characters from properties that sometimes can't turn it off and they just want the voices to stop.
I don't know, like I feel like they're really taking some liberties there, personally. Possibly. I feel like, and because I never felt like, one, that Legilimens were anywhere at that kind of power level, like a Xavier
the same. I got the impression there they were saying like they're very rare, but that she was not actively, like, every time someone walks in the room, like, casting the Legilimens, casting Legilimens, casting Legilimens.
No, I don't think she has to cast it.
Okay.
Just in the same way that Voldemort never actually had to cast it. Voldemort was so practiced in it that he became that good at it.
Right, and that's the part I never assumed that she was that practiced at it. It wasn't something she had intentionally tried to learn how to do.
Well, see, and this is where I think they would need some explanation. Because as far as I understood, there's things like parcel tongue that you can be born with the ability to understand snakes.
Sure.
But Ron, listening to Harry, can also mimic what he hears Harry say, even if he doesn't know what it means. So he can speak a line of parcel tongue, even if he's not sure what the word is. And I think... Well, what I'm saying is, like, I think if they're going to say, like... So technically speaking, if he can understand Harry and, like, work out the syllables, he could learn the language.
In theory, okay.
Right. So, and what I'm saying is, like, I think they need to hash that out and explain deeper. Because as far as I ever knew, you had to actively be working to be a Legilimens or Occlumens. In order to do either, you had to have that as a goal. Whereas something like a parcel tongue you could be born with. Because Legilimens is a spell.
Right, and that's why I said I think she was, like, in the same way like Tonks is, I forget the word for it, but she can alter her appearance at will, her physical makeup without the use of magic, like without an intentional spell or polyjuice potion or anything.
Like Sirius being an animagus and
somewhat, but even that took like practice and whatnot. Like Tonks was described as basically being born with that quality. And like I said, I there's some things that I think she's trying to convey that while they are rare, they're not unheard of.
Right. And I don't know, like it kind of frustrated me that you're not going to explain that. That's all. Like it's the only reason for that is just like I said, it was never.
Well, at the beginning of the Mike, I don't want to cut you off, but at the beginning of the movie, when Jacob and Queenie are at Newt's,
yeah,
she is effectively reading his mind without casting a spell. Correct?
Reading.
Well, a Legilimens
Newt's mind. Like, there's that whole interchange between the two.
Well, he's also projecting to her intentionally.
I thought that at first.
He said to her, "Get out of my head."
I thought that at first, and then when I saw it the second time, I thought,
Well,
I don't think so.
But there was also the idea that to be a practiced legilimens and occlumens, yes, it is a spell, but it was also a learned skill. Like, in other words...
So you could do it without casting.
Yes. That, like, Snape was able to read your mind without casting. Yeah, it kind of just
integrates into your being so much. You do it when you want without really having to think about it that much.
Okay, so flipping that to when she breaks down and hears a bunch of voices, I'm getting that as her being emotionally distraught. And she's losing control. Not that she's trying to read everybody, it's that she's so broken up at that moment that she can't help what's happening.
And that's what I kind of was getting to, is that I always felt like you had to actively try. Whether it's casting a spell or you're actively trying to read somebody's mind, it's two different things. Those, to me, it's fallen in the same category.
But that's like being completely in control. What if you go the complete opposite direction and lose all control? Does it just spill over?
It's not...
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not...
Because again, that's the way I'm interpreting that moment.
Same.
She's lost... She's at the point where she's lost everything. She's at her lowest. And that's...
I think...
you're supposed to be feeling for her in that moment.
It's the portrayal of that, especially, and how it happened so easily for her that... given... This is going to sound mean, but given the station in life that JK has created this character for, her role, she obviously seems like she's very jealous of this professional position her sister has, where in the first one it seems like she's kind of just like an administrator, maybe a slightly more glorified secretary type, that if she had this innate ability, number one, why would she not parlay that into something greater for herself? But this is going to sound bad, but it just doesn't seem like she was saying that she was such a skilled witch that she learned how to do this well. And that's all what led me to believe that this is just an inherent quality of this person. It just happens to be one thing that she's just wired with.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I get that.
I think it's either an agree to disagree, or the only reasonable explanation I've come up with for it in my head is that she's still searching for Jacob at that point. She's actively reading people's minds at random and at large.
Oh, right.
Because she's looking for Jacob's mind, and she doesn't know where it's at.
Well, that could be too. That could be that. Yeah, that breakdown at that moment could be interpreted the same way.
Sure.
But yeah, in general, moving along those same lines, I'm not sure how they explain her falling for Grindelwald's ruse. Now, yes, Grindelwald himself, we can just explain that away as he's a great occlumens, because he would, every great wizard who's bad would always probably practice occlumency to keep their secrets hidden.
And legilimency.
But she's not only presented with him as being the person that knows what's going on. She deals with that woman for quite some time, who obviously is in on everything that's happening. I would say his inner circle there all knows exactly what's going on, and it's not, they're not under the ruse of Grindelwald, they were just with him. They're in it for what he's in it for. And to assume that she can't read her mind, I think is kind of silly.
I agree.
She does say in the first movie that the accents make it hard.
That's true.
Even though that's just a silly kind of thing said in the first movie, maybe French accents make it even harder.
This is a stretch. I admit it, but this is a possible quasi-explanation. Is when she does have that breakdown on the street and then the woman comes up to comfort her, you're right, they don't portray her as having being actively reading minds anymore for the rest of the movie after that. So maybe there was something that once she kind of just had this little breakdown, it just temporarily turned itself off, as a way to give herself relief. Like she learned a little bit of control because she was so sick of hearing everyone's thoughts. Or to the other token, she was so distraught over not being able to find the one person that she wanted to. And she, like, in her attempt to find him, she heard everyone around her, and since she can't find him, she'd rather not hear anybody.
Okay.
Again, that's a stretch, but maybe it helps. Because I too was kind of wondering I don't think she fell for a ruse whatsoever. I think the point that you guys brought up earlier, that the fact that we don't get as much of an exposure to her and Jacob's relationship for the prior 9 months in the story time.
Yeah.
That's why her so easily being seduced by Grindelwald's ideas. I think she's 100%. I think she has her faculties. I think she knows exactly what's going on. But the emotional leap, the emotional distance that she travels from the end of the first movie to the end of this one is hurt. The understanding of that is hurt by the fact that the two of them just show up and you don't really get to see them grow from Jacob getting his memories back and whatnot. So I think she understands completely what she's done and the choice she's made and the reasons it appeals to her. But feeling...
Okay.
I mean, I get behind the sole reason she is doing that, to be able to marry Jacob. That's
or
what's driving her
right, or at least
that.
the and I don't think at this point she maybe wants to anymore, but the underlying notion of I want more control over my life.
And what I'll say about it's a rabbit hole that we can go down at some point. I don't want to steer this too far off track, but everything Grindelwald says to that entire room of people when it's full is a ruse. He's full of shit the whole time. And I will get into exactly what that is because I have a whole long series for you that I can explain exactly what's going on there. And like I said, but I don't want to. But that whole thing is a ruse. You can see the turn in him when they all leave, and he's left with only those who oppose him left. Those who aren't going to join him. You can see the turn in the character. You can see the turn Johnny Depp put into Grindelwald, and I thought that was one of the better points of the movie.
Okay.
Is that he goes from being charming to being dangerous.
I'll give you that, definitely. I do feel though that he's been known long enough and his activities have been known long enough that many of the people who find an appeal to him aren't that naive per se. Like they know what he wants and what he thinks he wants to do to get there. I think they absolutely know that.
Making my point for me.
And well, but so I know. I mean, the way he talks to them is not like, "Hey, soldiers, get ready, we're going to war." It's much more of a, any rising leader in history, and I actually appreciated getting to see this side of it because this is not really something we got to ever see in Voldemort. We never got to see how does he slowly run a coup? How does he build? How does he change minds? How does he convince people?
All right. I
really love that part.
I'll dive in head first for you since we're here. I'll try and make it quick.
Okay.
First,
you're on the clock.
We know that J.K. Rowling wrote this.
Mm-hmm.
We know where she stands politically. Grindelwald is a metaphor, or maybe not even a metaphor, maybe just a plain old representation of Donald Trump. 100% modern conservative alt-right using fear to get people to follow. He starts out with this grand idea of do what you want, have these freedoms, have this and that, and if you don't follow me, this is what happens. And he shows them World War II.
Sure.
Fear. Pushing fear to gain the followers. She writes it so well, but it's just there. He's using that, and that turn that you see in him from, like he tells his followers, the people that are with him, to disapparate, to get out of there, and go spread the word.
Tell everyone else we are not the violent ones.
Yes, exactly.
That was not lost on me.
And as soon as they're gone, though, is when he becomes dangerous. He becomes what he truly is. And he looks at these people and he just starts openly killing them.
Mm-hmm.
So they are the violent ones. Go tell everyone. Nobody's looking. I'm killing everybody that opposes me.
Sure. Now, I would say... Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
So what I'm saying is he is just fooling people to gain followers. He doesn't believe the shit he's saying. He has no interest in what he's telling them about, like, oh, we need this, that. No. He is 100% coming down on these people that are not going to follow him, and he is just getting people to be cannon fodder for him. Right,
and he is telling them, just like anybody would who wants to ascend to that position for that outcome, he wants to tell people what he knows they would like to hear to change their mind. Doesn't matter what he thinks, but he needs to find what will change your mind to follow me.
Yes.
Now, the only point I would disagree with is I don't challenge the fact that I know her political beliefs and her stances as well, and I actually enjoy them from time to time when she just says really funny shit to him on Twitter. But I think you could write this character and have a character like this. I mean, anybody could have written this character in the last 100 years. I agree. I think it just so happened because all people like that, and like take it back to let me just flesh it out. Take it back to the scene in Avengers when Loki attacks the opera and he corners everybody out there and he tells them to kneel, and the one old guy gets up and he says, "There are always men like you."
Right.
There are always people who throughout history have done this. I will agree that potentially she had an easier time picking out some specific mannerisms or points to emphasize given the contemporary situation, but I don't think that she intentionally conceived this character in any way to be a character of him.
I don't think she conceived the character in any way.
I think she had a lot of easy inspiration and examples to draw from.
What I was getting at in general as to what you were saying is think about the things you said when you're describing Grindelwald.
Okay.
People already knew what he was. People already knew this was a bad person. People already knew all these things about him, and yet they follow him anyways.
Right, and I think that's exactly how Voldemort ends up gaining power. You know, the same thing. So let's put a pin in that because maybe I don't have that completely fleshed out in my head, but you know, if the point we're starting at is you know, talking about Queenie in a way, do I think she's naive? Maybe slightly at first. Well, no, I wouldn't say naive. I think she may be making her decision for one reason more strongly than another. I think hers are more personal, per se, as like really caring about wizard dominance, but she knows that that's part of the game. She knows in order to get what she would like to have, all this other stuff is going to be her means to the end.
Right, but that's the point I'm getting at, is that Grindelwald isn't looking for peace with humans. He's not. Right,
and I think
and
she
that's
knows
where I'm
that.
saying she's being duped, is that, well, no, she's going because she wants her life with Jacob to be accepted.
Yeah, I'm saying I don't think she's in denial that in order to get what she wants, all that other stuff is going to happen. Even if it's not what she necessarily wants, she's accepting that it will happen if it gets her what she wants.
But I think the part that sticks out to me, there's somewhere in that speech where Grindelwald starts to talk about, okay, well, humans can be, you know, I don't want to kill them all. They can be used for some way. And somewhere in that line of dialogue, you can read between the lines and realize he's going to kill all these people anyway. So, meaning, if Queenie wants to marry Jacob and she goes to follow Grindelwald, eventually Jacob's going to die under Grindelwald's plan.
Grindelwald's not going to allow marriages between Muggles and humans.
Right. So I don't know how that's lost on her if the rest of us are picking. Like, I feel like she was smarter than that to realize that that's the end goal.
What I took her last moment when she screams at Jacob to come with her and he refuses, and she pauses for just a moment before she turns. I took that as she's recognizing that this specific outcome with this specific person may not be possible any longer, but the other points that he used to seduce her, like especially at the apartment, of like bringing up the fact of her position versus her sister's position in life and all that stuff. She is in that moment converting from, why can't I just have the life that I want with Jacob, to no one is going to stop me from having the life I want, whatever that is, even if it's not that anymore.
So in that moment, it's less about Jacob and more about her.
Once he refuses to follow with her, yes.
Okay.
Up until that moment, she's getting more desperate, but ultimately she realizes, I just don't want other things impeding what I want.
See, okay, so this just occurred to me too, and this sort of falls in line maybe with more of like the Trump comparisons that Mike had made. It's like at the point where like she realizes something's going to happen that's bad, but at this point you've gone too far to acknowledge you've made a mistake, and now you just have to fully commit to your mistake.
Sure.
That's the way I'm suddenly interpreting this now.
Doubling down on it.
I think some of this stuff could be so generic that it would be not difficult to envision these things happening, but it just so happens that we have this ridiculous real world living out example every day that we're all in the middle of, that
right, but
like for good or bad,
using that as inspiration though,
right?
In the way she's writing things specifically, I think she is.
It could
playing
be
on that, and very intentionally. Knowing her, it's a dig. It's her way of saying, like, and then later, like, he's gonna say something, and she's gonna say, like, oh, well, I did base the villain on you.
See, I don't know if it's gonna go that on the nose ever. Like, in the way that, like, Biff Tannen in Back to the Future 2 was admitted by the writers and creators to be based on Donald Trump. Like, they admitted that many times. Like, that was exactly, he was a spoof, a caricature of him. Like I said, I think there's a lot of parallels that we're living through in real time that make it easy to say that. And maybe because of her personal opinion of him, it's easy for her to look at that and really find the core of how she would want to portray someone like this, because it's right in front of her right now. But I don't know if she's necessarily intentionally like hoping that Donald Trump gets the point.
I don't think she's hoping that Donald Trump gets the point. I think
he's not going to see this movie anyway.
No, yeah, I was going to say, like, she's not hoping he gets the point in any way. I think she's doing the bits and pieces of it that you see that are so, like, they're the violent ones. Go spread the word. We're not the violent ones. I feel like those pieces are chosen
potentially
as a point to make.
It could be, and again, because we're unfortunately living through it at the moment, and it's right in front of us. Maybe it's difficult to not try to take that opportunity.
Right.
So I don't want to cut everybody's train of thought off on this, but I realize that we're like an hour and a half into this thing. Since we've got into spoilers, we've talked about 2 characters and 3 characters. So I just kind of want to try to move us along here.
Fair point.
So eventually, I mean, the big meat and potatoes is going to be the big end reveal. So before we hit that, do you want to go there next, or is there other things along the way that were on your mind?
I want to talk a little bit about Credence and what his sort of role is in the movie, but that can lead up to that last twist. Something I thought about when we were talking about the final speech and like choosing Grindelwald's followers and stuff. There was one dude that was in his inner circle that he refers to as like, well, we'll see if you're with me till the end. And then he gets burned up coming through the circle. I feel like there's a lot more story with that character and what that's supposed to mean, but to me that was just some faceless dude that suddenly died at the end, and I had no
They did not do
bearing on
a good job of explaining why he kills him. Like, the guy questions him like once earlier.
Right. Like, you should have seen more of a more lead up to that of him questioning am I on the right side, and trying to just more of a give and take and decide which side he wants to be on, and see that slowly go downhill to the point where he is no longer a follower and he gets chewed up by the fire.
And
Right.
I took that as not necessarily that he was regretting the side that he was on, but the way that I saw the like intimidation scene that happens like midway through the movie was that, why the hell would you dare question me?
Yeah.
It's not like he's doubting it, but it's like, this is what we're going to do. This is my tactic. This is my strategy. This is my decision. And the other guys just
the way the actor portrays it to me felt like, oh, suddenly he's questioning where he's at. And like, oh, did I sign up for the wrong thing?
Okay.
And even like when he's trying to run into that ring of fire, he hesitates. Like, well, okay, I feel like I should go for it. And then he dies.
Fair enough. It came through differently to me.
But again, but I
can see
think that leads to the point that I'm trying to make, where it's not fully explained one way or the other. And I just feel like that's something that either should be cut or fleshed out. Like, make a decision there. It had no bearing on the story for him being in there.
Yeah.
How did you guys feel about Jude Law as Dumbledore? Good choice.
I was fine with
medium
it.
choice, mediocre choice.
I mean, I feel like I'd like to see more maybe I'm not picking up on like the mannerisms of the Dumbledore that I know. And maybe it's just because it's a stark contrast between old white bearded guy in robes and younger shaven suit man.
Yeah.
So it's hard to make that connection.
Sure.
But as far as like him portraying a character, I thought he did fine. I enjoyed him.
Yeah, I didn't think he did anything wrong. I don't think there was anything there that I was like, that's not Dumbledore. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't feel that at any point. You know, it's still tough to get past that Jude Law thing where that's Jude Law, and he still sounds and looks very much like Jude Law, and this doesn't really hide that it's Jude Law.
And
I'm actually looking forward to when they can hide him behind makeup and longer white beards.
I think we actually did talk about that point when we discussed his casting news. That exact thing was said, that he's not really a character actor. So it's difficult to not always see him when he's playing a role. It's like, okay, there's Jude Law acting as somebody in this scenario this time.
It's like Will Smith playing Will Smith and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did like the way, especially the scene where they end up in, it's nighttime and him and Newt are strolling around. It's like toward the beginning of the movie, and they end up in that little like carriage bus thing, and just like the sort of annoying way that Dumbledore can set a person up into a set of circumstances really quasi against their will.
Yeah.
But it's still like a charming kind of way. I thought that was very characteristic of the Dumbledore that I know.
Yeah, he does the same thing to Harry how many times?
Right.
And I personally, that whole sequence, I love the glove.
Yeah.
The glove, I thought, was a fantastic touch.
Yeah.
That didn't, it doesn't require any explanation. It's just a fun little thing to add. And that you probably won't ever see again in any of the movies.
Maybe not, but even if we didn't, like, I'd be okay with that. Like, I didn't take it as, like...
Oh, yeah, don't get me wrong. I will actually cheer if I see the glove again. I'll be like, the glove. Awesome. What's it going to do? And that'll be fun.
What's it going to do?
Yeah. I mean, what's it going to do? It's going to point to where you should go or something again, probably. But that's okay.
I was happy that she created a physical, more tangible reason as to why Dumbledore also, for a long time, chooses not to physically confront Grindelwald, like this blood pact.
As opposed to just we were in love at one time thing.
And I can't get over it. Like, that was one of the things that really bugged me about the first trailer for this. Is the only one I watched, and I think even in that, they include that line of dialogue where he says, "I can't move against Grindelwald." And you just got this annoyance, like, dude, okay, you just got to get over it. People are dying everywhere.
Yeah, like, come on.
But which you know inherently is still going to be a factor, but it also, he, is, at least up to this point, physically impeded from doing so. And I guess the only way that he could deal with it previously would have been to confront Grindelwald in order to get this thing back in the first place. I guess through non-battle means, because if the deal that they made was to not fight each other, he would have to somehow get it back through other persuasion or other ways, and then still deal with the fact that it exists before he could then physically take him on. It was a nice little, maybe a little bit of a MacGuffin, but it was a nice little, like, plot thing to follow into the next movie. And that's what I meant, like, at the beginning, is like, now I have more mythology. Now I have a brand new thing. Like, oh, how does that work? What happens? Like, how does it limit you? What can it do? What can't it do? What does it allow you to do? What does it not allow you to do? That's what, like, really intrigued me about those stories to begin with, was just like layer after layer after, like, for every answer you have 3 more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, I may have ragged on it a lot, but I feel like the high points that they hit in what they were getting in between with Dumbledore and Grindelwald. I feel like those were definitely the stronger points of this story. And I feel like there's still some people that are going to be like questioning whether or not Dumbledore and Grindelwald were gay. Because, yes, J.K. came out and said it a long time ago.
Right.
But not everybody's seen that. It was never in the book. It was never...
I didn't see that. I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's never been explicitly put forward in a movie.
No,
in any way, shape, or form.
It was a question she got at a live book reading, like a big event live book reading, at some point after Deathly Hallows came out, like a year or two afterward. And however, I forget what the question was posed to her. It wasn't like, hey, I have this theory, am I right? The way that the question was posed, like, that is how she addressed it, by saying, like, well, the reason, that they did certain things when they were younger and why it took them so long to face him to begin with was because they, assumedly, they were, I mean, at least Dumbledore, her direct answer, I believe, was Dumbledore was gay and was in love with Grindelwald.
Yes.
It doesn't, to be fair, explicitly say that he was as well, or that they had a relationship together.
Fair enough. But they could still... I feel like she could get some balls in writing the screenplay and just say it, rather than implying here, implying there. Just remove, the kid gloves with it.
The subtext, yeah.
Yeah. And just have Dumbledore say, like...
I think...
Yeah,
I think she will. She doesn't seem to be scared of that. I think the reason it didn't have to come up explicitly in the books or in the prior movies was that that fact wasn't that inherently important to Harry's arc.
Absolutely. I don't think it needed to come up before now. But in this movie, there is so many, like in all those flashback scenes, it's like, seems fairly obvious, but some people are still going to be like, nah, not Dumbledore, because they pay no attention to what J.K. has said,
right,
or anything like that, so they'd have no context for it.
I have a question for you guys then, because this is sort of what Josh said from Rowling's quote, is that she acknowledged Dumbledore was gay, and we don't really know if Grindelwald felt the same way about Dumbledore. Mm-hmm. And that's something I feel like that, thinking back at it now, I guess that is open to interpretation. Because, yes, he is guarding that blood pact, but is he guarding it because he loves and misses Dumbledore? Is he guarding it because he knows while he has it, Dumbledore can't come after him?
At least the latter, if not the former as well.
Yeah, okay. Definitely one, maybe both.
I wouldn't be surprised if some point... Now that you've introduced this, let's just call it an amulet for lack of a better explanation... now that they've introduced this, if the next movie especially doesn't center on at least looking for solutions to undo it. You know, maybe the next movie ends. You know, one of the big resolutions of the next movie is, among other things, finally, you know, finding the way to destroy it. I feel like you can't beat around that bush much longer. I wouldn't be surprised if by sometime in the third movie, 2 years from now, that at that exact point that you're discussing is not just put out. Like, it has to be like during a discussion with Newt, like, hey, Newt, I need you to understand finally what this was all about. It wasn't just this thing. Here's what this thing was. I had to put other people in front of me, unfortunately, because of what this meant to both of us. Like, I think you just have to get there, and I think she will. She's
I
not
personally
afraid of that
think
stuff.
that could be where Dumbledore and Newt are going to discuss at the end of the film. When they're
Quite possibly, yeah.
off on their way and the Nifflers, you know, leading the charge and all that. I feel like they could be going to discuss, because it presumably, you know, Newt brings that back. He doesn't know. Like, he sees what it is, and he gets the idea that, holy crap, Dumbledore must have a blood pact with Grindelwald, and that's why this is this way.
Right.
But he doesn't know the history between them. And
right.
I feel like they're going to discuss why that was made. Because
yeah,
it's like, here this is, and he looks at him and he's like,
know.
What's this? You know?
Well, to Josh's point, if that's actually what they're going to do, put that in the fucking movie. Don't let that happen off screen, and then Newt comes back in the next movie and it's like, oh, I know everything.
Oh,
no,
yeah.
We'd like to hear that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we don't need the subtext look between Newt and Dumbledore to be like, well, I know how you feel about him.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
Like, let's,
and to be
let's
fair,
have that discussion.
in this one, it's, number one, he doesn't, because of it's not shame that he feels for having had those feelings. When the ministry officials come to the school and they're showing him the memories and they say, you two were as close as brothers. Closer than brothers, actually. He doesn't have to tell them because it's not important for them to know at that time. And the conflicting feelings that he has about it all, plus the fact that if he has, say shame is not the right word because it's not like a gay shaming thing, but the conflicted feelings about having feelings for someone who turned out to be this way and this type of person, he also maybe doesn't want just anybody who doesn't need to know that that's part of his and Grindelwald's history.
Well, I was going to say, perhaps the shame is the blood pact.
All right, both of them.
And
like the reason they made it
he's
really...
ashamed that he... Well, and this was what I was going to get to with the whole Grindelwald's not in love with him, is that he's ashamed that he was duped by Grindelwald into making a blood pact. Could be. Maybe, as you're talking about manipulation and whatnot, maybe even as they were teenagers and like in their, 19, 20 years old, maybe he realized what really Dumbledore's view of him was, and he made him play right into it. That's very possible. Mm-hmm.
One other character I want to bring up before we get to the credence and stuff. How did you guys feel about Tina? Because I felt like she got a complete, not character shift, but she went from, I felt like, being important to the first one to love interest in this.
Yeah, I felt she didn't have enough to do. And this was an interesting point that I was thinking earlier, which is, I think this one was J.K. Rowling's real first attempt at what I'll call like a Two Towers or Return of the King storytelling mode. Whereas this is her first time having to write separate storylines happening concurrently with different groups. So the Harry Potter books and even the first Fantastic Beasts movie pretty much mostly follow one solid group. Harry Potter movies and the books especially, well, the movies, we'll say, follow Harry straight through. Every now and then you're seeing someone else for a couple of minutes in direct relation to something involving him. In this movie, really, for the first time, you have, at one point, Newt and Jacob. And then you have Queenie trying to find Tina. Then you have the Aurors. Then you have Lita and her half brother and their family history subplot going on, and you have Credence at the circus, then you have Credence and Nagini going to find that person, and then on their journey, like, there's a lot going on, and I this is the first time, especially in movie form, like, she's had to juggle directly writing that kind of stuff, because the adaptations from the Harry Potter books to those movies, those screenwriters cut out so much of the side scenes and subplots that they just streamlined it. Like, if it is not Harry, Ron, or Hermione, preferably all three of them at the same time, it barely was a scene. Only when they needed to show you something did they ever really divert. And I think this was a challenge for her that didn't get balanced out quite right. And that's why you have a character like Tina that was so integral in the first one seem like she, didn't... Like, I would have loved to see her aura-ring a lot more than she got to.
Yeah.
I think what you've seen here as well was a missed opportunity, in my opinion, for the story going forward.
Mm-hmm.
In so much that we lose Lita at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
And I felt as though the love story for Newt with Lita and Tina at the same time was much more interesting than just the love story with Tina. Because you have this whole, she's marrying his brother, we never get an explanation of why. We never get the story of why she's marrying his brother and not him. We never get any of that story that, it's just looming there. Now she's gone, so it doesn't really matter even if they tell it afterward.
Right.
And we have all of this stuff there that they could have told with Lita, and I feel like they eliminated her because they didn't know how to squeeze it in.
And where else to go with it to sustain it, to continue being worthwhile or interesting.
And I also felt like, unfortunately enough for them, that the chemistry on screen between Eddie Redmayne and Zoe Kravitz was much better than what he had with Catherine Watterson.
Oh, really?
I
felt about equal. I enjoyed both of them. I like the awkward... See, I guess it's a very different dynamic. Like, him and Lita have a childhood history, so they come from a different place than meeting as adults, and Tina and Newt are both so insecure and so awkward that I it's like apples and oranges, but I thought they actually both worked well.
I think it worked well. I just think the chemistry was there, though, is what I'm saying. Like,
okay.
I just mean between the actors themselves.
Right.
When we're talking here, like, actual chemistry.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's just something that, no matter what script is there, that can't be wrote into a film.
Yeah, and I think to some degree it's the fact that Tina and Newt are separated for a good portion of the beginning, and then even when they're together, they don't really have that much time on screen together. Like, they don't have that much of an opportunity to give you that charm back from the first one. Because I thought they worked absolutely golden in the first one, and it just might have been a lack of intersection or screen time together that they didn't really give it a chance to shine as much in this one.
Yeah, that's definitely true as well.
All right, so I kind of want to bring us to probably our last bit here, because I think we're pushing 2 hours, which I think might be a little bit too much for this one. I kind of want to segue with spinning from Lita, her whole backstory of like switching the babies and stuff, and then leading to that reveal of that Credence may or may not be a Dumbledore, which I think might be open to debate. We'll see where that discussion goes. That whole plot point seems so convenient to me. Like, she just happened to switch with who might be a Dumbledore, and that's the explanation we get as to this family tree that's all screwed. Like, to me, it seems like the whole movie hinges on that. And Credence as a character, I felt like was not wasted, maybe, but didn't have enough to do. I feel like the whole movie, you're just waiting to get that reveal, and he has nothing to do until that reveal happens at the very end of the movie.
I'll agree to that, yeah.
And for being one of the villains of this franchise or this movie moving forward, I feel like there was more that needed to be done there.
Well, one, I don't feel like Credence is a villain. I feel like Credence is a victim.
All right, that's fair.
But
tragic villain, tragic antagonist.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'll give my short take on this as best I can. I agree. It's way too convenient. It's way too, I don't know, more Dumbledore family drama stuff coming into play that is just kind of, to me, both expected and at the same time lackluster, in my opinion. I know that's going to sound crazy, like, oh, it's Dumbledore's long-lost, never-mentioned-before brother. Because, as you probably, seems like you don't know, Brian, this is never, ever mentioned in anything. We get, his sister that is mentioned extensively in the last book. They talk all about it. And of all this stuff that's ever uncovered, the baby drowned at sea that the Dumbledore family lost, as well as evidently a family servant, because it wouldn't have been Dumbledore's mother that drowned at sea with that baby, because that would have had to have been talked about. So they send, so evidently the Dumbledore family, without notice, being so prevalent in the community that people were paying enough attention to write all these stories about decades and decades later, was able to send a newborn baby across the Atlantic, unbeknownst to anyone. Nobody knew the baby was born. Nobody knew they were sending it away. Nobody knew their caretaker died. None of that. To that, I'm saying grown. But also, it's very, in my opinion, for this series and where we were at with Fantastic Beasts, predictable. Because to me, there was no chance they were going to say he was a Lestrange. I was never under any delusion at any time watching that film that, oh, he's going to be a Lestrange. Because it's like, why? The only reason they would make him a Lestrange is if they were going to have him be Sirius's father or some crazy shit like that isn't going to happen now. But other than that, they would have no reason in the plot to make him a Lestrange. Like, furthering going forward. They don't play that big a role in the history of the Potter world. Bellatrix plays a bigger role in the history of the Lestrange family than any other member.
And she marries into it.
Right. And she's not even actually one of them.
Right.
So, we have this whole story with him somehow being a Dumbledore and somehow conveniently on the boat and everything. It just, I don't know, that made my brain hurt. Because I was hoping... The only thing going through my mind going into the end of it, and I hate to say it this way, was don't say Dumbledore. Don't say Dumbledore. Say Peveril. Please say Peveril.
Oh,
don't go
cool.
this route. Exactly. And it wouldn't have required a complete retcon of what we can reasonably say we know about the Dumbledore family. Which is a lot.
Well, even, like, just talking to people after the movie, like, people like Josh and yourself who know this type of lore, convinced me that, yes, okay, he can't be a Dumbledore because of previous lore that has set up the family tree for the Dumbledores, and this would be coming out of nowhere.
Timing.
If he's actually related. Yeah. So, whenever he reveals the name Dumbledore at the end, I immediately assumed, oh, he's lying. Like, that's just what what Credence wants to hear at that moment to be part of this team. But there's, at the very end of the beginning of the movie, they set up the whole thing of the Phoenix appearing to Dumbledores, and then we get the Phoenix at the end, which suddenly I'm like, wait a minute, now that doesn't make sense to me. So someone set me straight here.
So I'm completely on board with the idea of him being a Dumbledore, just not from Albus Dumbledore's parents. The Dumbledore that we're seeing in this movie is approximately 80 years old. Dumbledore's mother died when he was roughly 19 years old. His father died when he was an early teenager. Credence is being generous, let's say 20 to 25 at
we don't
most.
have an age, but yeah.
So let's say 20 to 25 at most. So biologically, it just doesn't work at any point that is like a half brother, or like his parents did not father someone else. They were already dead.
Don't they even say brother though?
So that's it. Yeah. So it brings me to so that's a good counterpoint. I realize that is the part where either I could see Grindelwald flat out lying to him, or just using that as like your brethren, your kin, your blood, your brother. Admittedly, it is a strange choice for her to write that word, because it seems like she does deliberate things. But I feel it's too weak to be simple manipulation. It's too weak for it to just
If
be,
it's simple
she's
manipulation,
lying.
this movie's useless.
Right. Oh, he's lying
The
to
entire
him, and
story.
he'll find it out, and that's it. Like, Grindelwald's better than that. Grindelwald's smarter than that. He could come up with something better. So my only possible takeaway is it was a generic term used not to mean blood brother. Like, direct, you share a same parent.
So did Dumbledore have any uncles that we know
So
about?
I tried looking into this. I think his grandmother or his aunt is mentioned in like one sentence somewhere, but like not by name, and it doesn't really play. It's just a referential word. Like, it's not even meant to be important in any regard. It's just a throwaway mention. So that's why, I mean, it could potentially be some part of an extended family that shares the surname still, but nothing that we've been exposed to before. And I've been reading some really strange, stupid theories from people so far.
I was going to say, let me ask you guys, try to get a definitive answer from you. Would you rather have it be, or what, maybe not would you rather have it, or what do you think it's more likely to be? Either a distant Dumbledore relative, or do you think they're going to retcon it where he actually is the brother of Dumbledore?
The second one.
I
Sad face.
don't think retcon can work. I don't think she is as flagrant with her stories to create that massive of a hole. Her novels are pretty tight when it comes to continuity and not contradicting herself. There's a few little things, but nothing this major.
I agree, but again, we don't know how old Credence is. I'll
Granted,
say that,
but
you know, we don't know.
Do you think?
And
So, but the only possible, well, we have to have some idea, because we know Lita is
a few years older.
say 30 years old.
Do we?
Say roughly.
If Dumbledore looks like that at 80, do we know that Lita is 30?
I think they gave the impression that that like someone like her and Newt and Thassius have not been out of school that long. Like 15 years at the most. I do not think I do not think that Newt is supposed to be 50 to 60 years old.
Do we?
I feel like Dumbledore is the exception. Like the one guy that's maybe a lot older but not look that old. Like I think everybody else would.
No,
I mean, she
they
points
don't.
out that wizards, like the magical people, live much longer and age slower. That is
Okay,
accepted, but I don't think that is what. I guess a concrete answer has not been provided, but I think.
But here's the thing: would it be as much of a stretch to instead of saying 50 or 60 to say 40 to 50? Because that's only the real to get to the point. You know, like don't get me wrong. Like if what you're saying, you know, like when he was in his late teens, early 20s is when his parents died.
Yeah. So
so we're talking 60 years difference between
right. So Credence would have to be 63 years old for that to even conceivably...
That truly impossible?
Because
he's an obscurus as well.
Yeah.
And we don't know a lot about them.
But that would also mean that he was adopted and in the care of people in America and like Miss Barebone for 60 years. And she was so anti-witch.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, yeah. All right. You're right.
Like I said,
on
I
that.
read all sorts of theories today. I read one that said Dumbledore's little sister that died when she was like 13, Ariana, that this is like that when the Muggle boys who accosted her as a young girl, that Dumbledore's father then attacks and goes to jail for, that when they attacked her, they actually raped her, and that Credence could potentially be her son that she had when she was like 11. I'm like, okay, first of all, that's
a little
really
bit dark
effed up.
for. Yeah, that's a little bit dark.
But again,
for this.
it just the timeline. It just
although they
doesn't
did
work.
work in friggin' rape into this movie somehow, so
Right. I don't think it works. So I'm excited to see what more mythology she weaves around this, but
I'm frightened
don't
that she's
think-
going to.
I don't think it works into anything that we already know.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's got to be that's where I'm giving it leniency, and
Mhm.
I'm saying if she explains this in some other way, then yes, this is Dumbledore's actual brother.
Mhm.
Then I'm willing to listen to what she's going to explain. If she's explaining it as this is Dumbledore's brother, I'm just it's going to ruin it for me.
It's going to be a much harder pill to swallow. I agree. Brian, let me ask you this: if you were to watch the first Fantastic Beasts again, do you think you would try to see this one again while it's still in theaters, or at the very least, would you like? Are you okay? Like, I'll wait for it to be on DVD and maybe I'll watch it again.
At this point, I'd probably wait for home. Yeah, the home
Home video.
my home
Yes.
video stuff. Yeah, I don't know if I get out there to see it again in the theater. But I want to point out too, you're the only one out of us, the three of us, that have seen this movie twice.
True,
Mike and I are only coming at this
true, but
once.
I don't know how much more you would be helped without getting the refresher from the first one again, at least.
Oh, right.
Some things
Yeah.
might, maybe after this discussion, it might piece a little bit better, but in terms of the overall arc of it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if, like, even after our discussion, and it's weird to say that, Josh, I think you might have been the only one trying to defend this movie for a lot of points. But I don't know if our discussion improved my score at
Okay.
all. I still feel like I'm still middle of the road type of score with it. But yeah, that's not to say that if I did go back and watch the first one again and then immediately followed up with this one, I think it would probably improve the story. Either that, or it's going to make some of these plot points, like the Jacob Queenie stuff, a lot more apparent to me, and then
Possibly.
I'm just going to not like this one as
True,
much.
true.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I guess I could see it going either way, but I guess that could be an experiment to try at some point.
Like I said, I the way that I started out is still, I think, why I came out of it with a favorable impression is I miss this feeling of having more questions than answers again. And
Yeah, you're at the fun part where you get to speculate on what's coming next over the course of three movies.
And like I said, the first one didn't really leave me with that, and this one definitely has.
Yeah.
And it's left me with a lot more connective tissue to other things that I do already know that I can speculate on or really desire to have the clarification. Is it this? Is it that? Is it not? What does that mean? So because it gave me that feeling again as well. Plus, there's a lot of new stuff that she did introduce that I did just happen to dig a bit. Like I loved the Nicholas Flamel part.
I was just thinking, that was one
in
thing
the
we didn't
cabin.
touch on, and I don't know how much we want to get into that, because I don't know how much time that'll take.
Yeah, I know.
Not a lot.
But like little things like that, like I really appreciated where like that's one of those things that I meant that was like fan service, but it didn't feel like pointless fan service.
I
to
think
me.
we're going to see much
Okay.
more of Nicholas going forward.
Maybe. And
Yeah, at least I'm thinking with Mike from the way they leave him
Mhm.
and his whole line of like, well, I haven't been out to do anything in millennia or years or however
Yeah.
long he says. I think he will play a bigger part moving forward.
like I like when he opens up his little cabinet as he's running, well, like jog walking around his house, and he opens up his cabinet and there's the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah.
The sad part is I think his little jog walk is the funniest part of the movie. Like, none of the jokes hit as well for me, but that part made me laugh.
Yeah, the jog walk was definitely great. And to me, the only other funny part was just Jacob's random like exclamations every now and then when something crazy would happen that he didn't understand. He just, and that to me,
Nothing beats him taking that laughing juice or whatever in the first movie.
Giggle water.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Giggle water.
That shit gets me. Him and his giggles, that gets me every time.
So I will maybe close out the discussion by saying that after seeing it the second time, Sarah is now convinced that when I am like 70 to 80 years old, I will have the mannerisms and movement behaviors of Nicholas Flamel.
That just blew my mind because I can totally see it.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I can see this. It's the facial
Like,
structure.
even if
Like,
you
it
don't-
looks like you could grow into that as an old
Yeah.
man. Like, that could be old
And
Josh.
even if you don't have to move like that, you will move like that because you'll be like, oh, look who I am. I'm just like him.
Yeah.
Like,
And you have to put on, like, that long, like, single white robe thing. Like,
tell Sarah she is spot
I'm
on.
Yes.
agreeing with you, honey. She said she's vindicated. Oh, I need better friends.
Should we end with scores? Do we
That's
wanna
our
give it a
usual.
score out of 10?
Go ahead.
Oh, we're
Yeah, go
starting with me. I'm leaning just under the bar. I think I'm gonna go like 4.5
Oh, wow.
for me.
okay.
okay. I'm gonna go 6.5. Plus or minus 2.5 based on future content.
Okay.
If things are
Yeah, I
explained to my liking, could be up to a 9. If they are explained not to my liking, could be low as a 4.
All right.
And I think that's part of my score too. I think as a movie standalone, this doesn't do it for
Okay.
me. As part of a series, when all the other pieces are there, and you go back and
Mhm.
watch this, I think my score could
Yeah.
come up.
See, I know,
But, yeah, for
I know
right
the
now,
Potter
it's pretty
movies
low.
have been out for so long, but like, I would be curious to know, like, Brian from 15 years ago or whenever it is that, like, I don't know if you were watching those Potter movies in real time as they were coming out in theaters, but like after you saw maybe the first, second, third one, did you sort of have the same reaction at the time where like the overall framework wasn't as revealed, and so these individual installments might have seemed much weaker because of that? You know what I mean?
I caught up somewhere in the like after 3 or 4. I think I started seeing all of them after that in the
Okay.
theater. So I was maybe somewhere in the middle. I finally started watching them in
Yeah.
the theater.
Yeah.
But even still, I didn't feel like they felt more like the Star Wars movies, where the movie itself felt like it resolved a lot of what happened in that movie, but there was obvious plot points and overarching things that carry on to the next one. This one just, again, felt like setup the entire
Okay.
time, and there's no payoff or resolution for much of what happens in this
I got
movie.
Yeah. I would agree with what he said.
And I really think the only, like, aside Jacob, I will always love Jacob, but I feel like the only other character that I actually sort of gave a shit about in this movie is Newt. Everybody else is largely forgettable for me.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference to the Harry Potter movies, is you have your core 3 people, which get the majority of the screen time, and you are on board and care about what happens to them the
And
entire
then
time.
there's another 6 or 7 ancillary characters that you give a shit about, too, that they
Yeah.
do
Right,
so much
right.
for.
There's a lot better character stuff going on, I think, in those
I
movies.
can see that. I got you.
Low-key cared more about Hagrid through all of them than Harry.
I'd probably put it at like a soft 7. Hoping that, I wouldn't say it improves necessarily, but what comes later makes what we now have been informed about that much better. I hope it's a bit of a more like retroactive, like, oh, that was important. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get
Exactly, like, tied together properly, this could be one of those movies that you're like, oh man, I gotta watch that one. Not tied together
Yeah.
properly, it could be the one that
And-
you're like,
and
yeah,
it
we
might-
can skip that.
It might be that in her mind she has the framework already for all 5, and it's just unfortunately like we're seeing segment 2 of a 5-part movie, and each piece doesn't necessarily feel strong on its own.
Yeah, I think that's my probably biggest complaint.
Yeah.
And again, I think that falls back on a lot of the same criticisms that Steph leveled at Lord of the Rings for her. So I can definitely see where she's coming from.
Yeah, this is definitely
And the difference
Fellowship.
is that was a trilogy, and this is a 5 movie series.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's going to be more filler before we get to the stuff that actually is going to give.
They
that I'm
they
gonna care
need the
about.
third movie to end with a bang. They
To
really,
be very,
really,
or to
really
be
do.
at least, yeah, it needs to be very, very strong. Like I feel like in the Potter series, like midway through, you had Goblet of Fire, and you have the return of Voldemort.
Yeah.
Like, regardless
Bang.
of everything else that happens in that movie that can be fun, like with the dragons and the maze and all that, what you have is the return of the thing that shouldn't exist in the first place, let alone it's back.
Right.
They need a punch in the third
Yeah.
one. They need a big punch.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be your second act, is the third one, right? Smack in the middle of everything.
Mhm.
So that's when stuff should go to shit.
Yep. Yep.
All right. I think we've talked long enough. I think we're up over 2
And
hours.
if anyone would like
We're
to
bordering 2.5.
continue talking, I am always available for that.
I actually just want to make a point, because back to Mike talking about Hagrid. Mike, I feel like that should be your Halloween costume next year, is to be Hagrid.
That is
Wow.
pretty
So he's Nicholas
perfect.
Flamel, and now I'm Hagrid.
Oh, we're gonna find characters for everybody. It's gonna be. I don't know who I can be. You guys are gonna have to pick one for me.
Oh, this has nothing to do
But-
with that, but my favorite prior character call out in this movie that tied to something else was McLagan.
Random. Yes.
I loved it. Anyway, okay, move on. Yes, we'll find
Yes,
a
that's
character.
Over
We'll
the
find
head
a
for me.
character for Brian.
Yeah, that we could have. Whole Harry Potter crew for this. I think I like it. It would work. All right, yeah. If you've enjoyed the show, please stop by iTunes. You can leave us a 5-star rating and review. Be sure to share, subscribe, favorite the show, which you can find on Google Play as well. You can find us on Facebook, search Bry Guy and Super Friends, or go to facebook.com/Bry Guy Super Friends. You can send us questions, comments, topic suggestions there, or you can tweet us at BG Super Friends on Twitter, which I can now get to on my phone, so I will actually see notifications. I have an email address, although, but we still don't check that. So that's bryguysuperfriends@gmail.com. That's still vacant. But Twitter, hey, that's up and running. So that's a thing now. On behalf of Josh, Mike, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.